Thank you so much, Anna, and welcome to all the distinguished guests for this panel. I'm honored to welcome you to this vital COP29 side event, Governance for Strengthening SDG Climate Synergies. The need for integrated governance approaches to address climate action and sustainable development is pivotal moment, and today's discussion underscore our collective commitment to advancing this essential agenda. As an institute, and many of you perhaps are aware that TERI is a 50-year-old organization which is working on providing sustainable solutions. When we were established in 1974, not many organizations were talking about renewable energy, and we were set up by Tatas, and to set up an institute with objective of not-for-profit autonomous. That was a major step, and we have still the same values that we are working for the global goods. And it is utmost importance today that we all have to overcome a small little benefits, or rather look at the larger agenda of how do we make this planet a livable place. And that definitely asks for sustainability, that asks for sustainability solutions, and basically also looking at what we are facing today due to the changing climate. It goes without saying that all of us, all stakeholders on this planet Earth, we contribute to the changing climate, but the impact of that varies on who we are, or where we are, because unfortunately the impact of climate change is not the same. We also discuss about sustainability, and I'll say that sustainability is something which was engraved in DNA of every Indian. And it is that over a period of time, we started following what is happening in the countries which are blessed with, I should say, high economic growth, or otherwise that we also somewhere, we lost our way, and with a huge population with minimum of resources, we really suffered a lot. And we are trying to bring back sustainability agenda on the map, and also as a country, how do we follow? And I'll also like to say that there is a Mission Life initiative of Government of India, which basically it is that how do we ensure that it becomes a general movement. Everyone should look into what their own carbon footprint is, how they are impacting the planet, and I believe that what get mired is basically what get managed as well. So therefore, it becomes extremely important. I'm looking towards today's discussion, which will focus on the imperatives to strengthen governance mechanisms that not only support, but enhance the synergies between SDGs and climate action. As highlighted in TERI's recent policy brief on climate SDG synergies, one of the biggest challenges lies in fostering coherence and coordination across policies and governance levels. Integrating climate and SDG agendas require policies that are interconnected, yet adaptable, fostering multilateral cooperation to achieve shared goals. The need for this integration is particularly acute in the areas of sustainable energy, biodiversity protection, and equitable resource use, where governance structures must not only support national agendas, but also align with broader global frameworks. Our policy brief, which we'll be releasing shortly, it underscores the need for strong institutional capacities, transparent decision-making, and inclusive policies that ensure no one is left behind. Particularly, we are worried about the vulnerable and marginalized communities that unfortunately are worst affected due to the climatic impacts. These events provide us with a unique opportunity to explore how we can strengthen governance models that support these synergies, ultimately creating more resilient, sustainable, and equitable outcomes. I'm hopeful that today's deliberations will illuminate pathways towards multilateral cooperation, effective governance, and stronger climate SDG alignments that will inspire concrete actions beyond COP29. And thank you once again for joining us in this critical dialogue. And I look forward to your participation. And I'm sure at the end of the day, we'll have better roadmap how to proceed further. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dhawan. And I was told that we will now, first of all, hand over a publication. I was also told that you will have to rush to the airport. So I would welcome the colleagues from TERI to transmit the publication. And with this, we dive into the content part of the panel. And I would ask for the first set of slides. Can we get the first set of slides coming up? Now, while we are all here to look at climate and, of course, the Paris Agreement, engage in all activities towards the Paris Agreement, I think we also agree that climate, water, biodiversity, the desertification, the full range of ecological challenges can only be addressed if we take social challenges, economic challenges, political challenges also into account. And due to this, we decided to start this session by moving into a report that was recently released and handed over to the German government by the German Advisory Council on Global Change. I can't forward the slides. It is. In order to really place here an emphasis on the questions of water governance and also engage here with this report in the advisory processes for the UN water process on the level of the United Nations and contribute to de-risking, we called it, de-risking the situation that we see dynamics of environmental change, and we here explicitly look at water and political change processes, economic change processes, namely the debt crises, unfolding together and developing very risky scenarios, riskscapes between them. We know, of course, that this takes place in a situation where neither we are on track with the Paris Agreement, nor are we on track with regard to the Agenda 2030. And with this as a background, the WBGU, as it is called, looked into, first of all, a number of regional water emergencies. All of us, all of you are witnessing regional water emergencies that range from the floods in Pakistan or the floods in Spain right now to what we studied as engagements with virtual water and drought. I'm sorry, but how can I make this work to actually move forward? Towards here? Okay, thank you. To situations in California or water scarcities in cities. These all are found in a lot more detail in the report. I will just sort of rush us through a little to give you an overview. Overall, the water emergencies, of course, range from droughts, and here we look at the examples of the MENA region, to floods, as mentioned already, the Pakistan floods, or also the floods in Spain. Also, for instance, the floods in West Africa just recently, extreme weather events that take place at a more regular basis and all over the globe. But besides droughts and floods, we of course also see that not only water quantity, but also water quality is being affected. Here we look in the report at the level of pollution across sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, or also, for instance, the water availability in the future. And here we particularly look at the glacier melt in the Hindu Kush Karakoram Himalaya region. So what we argue by sort of studying regional water emergencies around the globe and on all continents, we can observe that these regional water emergencies in some, and together with the dynamics that unfold at the interface with social, meaning debt-related, financial and political crises, meaning social polarization and autocratization, build up to a situation where we observe regional water emergencies with a planetary dimension and of planetary proportion. We then argue that, of course, here we can observe a shrinking operating space, and the ambition has to be of policymakers to increase that operating space or maintain the existing operating space by investing into ambitious climate policy making, for instance, by increasing our capacities to mitigate and adapt, but also by taking on long-term planning perspectives. Long-term, they're particularly important in the field of water because the infrastructures required for water governance create long-term path dependencies into the future. We then formulate a number of messages, and I have only the possibilities to only sort of run us through a few main ones. But here we argue, first of all, that we observe, as argued, as stated already, new riskscapes emerging, which means that the fluctuation in the availability of water, and not only quantity but also quality, increases substantially with a shift in variance that requires substantially more capacities for adaptive planning and adaptive governance. Message 2 here is to explicitly invest and ensure that we invest also in the UN water process into climate resilient water management. So not just water management that could be called sustainable, but indeed climate resilient water management. And by doing so through a number of steps, I want to emphasize here the focus also on green water. The current governance frameworks have a tendency to focus on blue water mainly. But the report, or we argue increasingly, to also engage and reflect and include green water, meaning water bound in the plants, in the soils, into the governance processes. And here I hear that and see that I have the honor to briefly interrupt in order to welcome Syeda Rizwana Hasan, Honorable Advisor to the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, and the Ministry of Water Resources of the Government of Bangladesh. Very welcome. Thank you for being here, Honorable Advisor. We will hear from Ms. Hassan in a minute. I will just walk us through our main messages further. No? So here, message 2, I just recall, was to clearly emphasize also green water in the water governance frameworks across all sectors. And to carry a clearly bottom-up and top-down perspective into the UN water process. What we mean here is we speak of a consultative and a proactive state taking on a leading role in water management. That is the case in many world regions, but not in all. I mentioned here the privatization waves in the field of water over the past years. But we then also argue that a proactive state means to put a lot of attention or pay attention to the interface between formal and informal water governance, foster traditionally grown water governance and include it into the formal water governance that takes place, but to carry this then into the UN water process and argue indeed for an international water strategy, while we of course know how contested that topic is. We nevertheless feel and are convinced that especially in a time where multilateral negotiations become more difficult, they also become more needed. And they become more needed, especially in those areas where we have a clear joint focus. And that, of course, is possible within the field of water that is so crucial for life. The last point I want to mention here is that then we do not only argue for strengthening the UN water process through another combination of bottom-up and top-down approaches, but to again explicitly carry green water approaches, and with this also the discussions around virtual water into the discussions for an international water strategy, all with a focus, of course, on strengthening SDG 6, but SDG 6 in the context of new riskscapes emerging at the interface of a globally warmed and heated planet, as well as not only climatically heated, but geopolitically heated planet, in which the joint agenda that we have, the Agenda 2030, but that unfortunately is not developing the pulling effects that it needs to develop, can be substantially also strengthened through the UN water process, but also by bringing it together with the focus on climate focused alliances. We here underline the need to mitigate, to adapt, to strengthen adaptive capacities, and want to argue for strengthening the UN water process. I apologize that I cannot go into more detail, but I invite you to look at the full report on the website of the German Advisory Council on Global Change. The English summary is available already. The English full version comes out in January. And with this, I thank you very much for this quick overview. And I think immediately welcome the Honorable Advisor, Ms. Hasan, to speak to us. Thank you. Is that change? Yeah. Quick change. I would welcome our panelists first, actually, and then have later on a full rounding off of the event through the minister. So I welcome Shailly Kedia and Gopal Sarangi from TERI and TERI's School of Advanced Studies. Please join me here at the panel. Then I invite Alistair Ritchie from the Asia Society Policy Institute. Welcome. And Dr. Golam Rabbani from BRAC, please. And of course, Honorable Advisor, Ms. Syeda Rizwana Hasan. Thank you. And we will kick off the discussion by Shailly Kedia and Gopal Sarangi, focusing on implications of SDG climate synergies and reflect on these synergies out of the perspective of multilateralism and governance, and of course, out of the perspective of TERI. Welcome, please.
I do have a presentation, so I'll just. So just wanted to very briefly introduce the Act for Earth initiative, which is a knowledge initiative that was launched in 2022 at the 21st edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit. And under this, we have two components, which is the COP Compass and SDG Charter. So the insights will be from the SDG Charter, under which we undertook work on looking at synergies between climate action and SDGs and its implications for multilateralism. Okay, so firstly, why we talk about SDG climate synergies? Already, Professor Hornidge has highlighted that we are severely off track. If we count the targets that are not tracked, then the ones that are on track actually comes down from 17 to 14%, and 20% of targets are not even tracked. So that highlights a very strong data gap. And we are just we are completing 10 years, a decade of the adoption of Paris Agreement and SDGs next year, and 20% of the targets are not even tracked. There is evidence that links climate action to achievement of 80% of the SDGs, and adaptation measures have a very strong linkage with SDGs, wherein 70% of the SDGs can be realized from adaptation action alone. What we see in the discussions of the high-level political forum, there is a north-south divide, wherein the developed countries want to focus more on interconnectedness, while the developing country group focuses more on balance between the social, economic, and environmental pillars. So, so in terms of the ways forward, and I will not take much time, if we look at the implications of how the multilateral processes have evolved, we see two different strands. And although they had common origins, as the sustainable development in the Rio and the Rio Conventions, the processes at the multilateral level as well as the national level have diverged. Now, recently, we have UNDESA and UNFCCC come up with an initiative called the Climate and SDG Synergy Platform, wherein there is an attempt to at least bring both these agendas in terms of the issues together. But what we feel is this is more at an expert level, and this has to be buttressed by political mandates. So have strong mandate for SDG climate synergies at HLPF. At this stage, whereas there is a normative knowledge role that the UN is playing, there is still need for strong political mandates. And one of the ways where this mandate can be brought in is to integrate SDGs and climate reporting, even if it is in terms of mapping with each other. And also in the third aspect, which we feel is that since the adoption of climate agreements and the Sustainable Development Agenda, there has been progress in terms of vertical integration. However, horizontal integration is still not very strong. Ministries and departments still tend to operate in silos, especially when they are concerned with either environmental issues and economic issues. So this is the aspect, but I would request my colleague Gopal to share very specific insights wherein he has undertaken work related to carbon markets and SDG. Over to you, Gopal.
Okay, thank you, Shailly. I think I won't take much time. I don't have a formal presentation. I'll just draw upon the discussion that we're having in this COP. This COP is specifically known as Finance COP. And one of the integrating issue is basically the linkage between the finance and the sustainable development. Specifically, when you talk about, let's for example, carbon market. Now the question boils down to the fact that whether you need actually a market for different developing countries. Let's take the example of India. If I take the example of India, the total emission coming from India is only 7 to 8%. If you're looking at the cumulative emissions, 3 to 4%. And if you are taking the market route, particularly the carbon market, which is designed at the country level, also being discussed globally, that at best the mitigation that you can do can take care of the 7% emissions. And if you're going beyond that, what would happen? The question is that probably the carbon market could act as an effective source of mobilizing funds. Now the question again is much more complicated. Why? Because if you're mobilizing funds, let's, for example, you are going through the compliance route. Let's take the example of India is planning to have the CCTS market around 2026. The question is that if you're going through the compliance market, if you have a mechanism what is being operated, let's say, example, in European Union ETS, you have this emission allowances. And if you're auctioning the emission allowances, if you're getting money through the auctioning, and that could probably be helping you to public financing of the climate adaptation activities. Now the question is that whether actually it will be directed towards the climate adaptation activities or not is something, again, is a very tricky question. The other question is that, let's, for example, in a compliance market, are not actually charging a fee, and the money is going to the industrial units. The question then actually a trade-off between the industries and then what is happening to the sustainable development. Why is it so? Because if you're charging a fee, then you're actually kind of mobilizing the public financing, and that could possibly be directed towards climate adaptation funding. If you're not charging, then you're actually creating a divide, because this divide is widely divided in almost all platforms that's happening in COP29 about the justice, right? So the question again is very, very critical. The other question which is around the carbon market is about the voluntary carbon space. If, let's, for example, the funds or carbon revenue that you talk of is generated through the VCM market, and if you don't have a control, what is the guarantee that the money would be collected through the carbon market is spent on the green activities? Why not that money would be directed towards the non-green activities? Whether the VCM can be connected to the compliance market, is there any way of doing that? And the another complexity is coming up as we keep on discussing is about 6.4 and 6.2 under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And then if you're dividing that, and is there any linkage through which, because if you look at the VCM, even the new paradigm of the carbon market enshrined in the Paris Agreement is not talking about how that can be well connected to the Article 6.4. And the evidence that I've drawn from the CDM implementation earlier also shows that the effective implementation of these CDM projects has not really led to the sustainable development goals. So these are essentially the questions that we need to think about. Otherwise, the revenue that will be generated may not lead to kind of expectations that we're looking forward to. Thank you. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shailly and Gopal. And you already built the bridge from the Agenda 2030 to the carbon market. And with this, we will now move to Alistair Ritchie from the Asia Society Policy Institute, who will speak about emissions trading systems and particularly about the system being introduced in the Indian context. Ritchie. Alistair.
Thank you very much, Professor Hornidge. And you put presentation 3 on, please.
We would need set of slides number 3.
Great. Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to, building on what you've heard from Gopal on carbon markets. I think this is a very interesting area for strong synergy with SDG goals. And I would like to give the example again in India of how this can work. So I'll give a brief introduction to emissions trading systems. I'm talking primarily about the compliance carbon market. So this is the carbon credit trading scheme in India, which is one of the largest carbon markets under development at the moment. I'll be talking about the impacts of emissions trading systems, how they connect with the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'll talk about a project we're doing on just transition through India's carbon credit trading scheme, which is designed to support the transition, particularly in the fossil states in India that are reliant on the coal economy, to transition to the new low carbon economy, and then finish with some recommendations. So just as a brief introduction, emissions trading systems are well established now and widely adopted. The reason is because they're cost effective. They encourage emissions to be reduced where they're cheapest, and they also guarantee achievement of the targets through effective monitoring, reporting, verification. So emissions trading systems are widely being taken up by many countries globally, and especially because of the NDC targets. So it enables a country to meet their NDC target in a cost-effective way, especially with the EU CBAM. That's been a big driver, especially in Asia, towards wider uptake of emissions trading systems. And the Indian system is one of the most significant systems under development, expected to be launched next year, covering 9 industry sectors and maybe 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions. And in terms of the primary role of emissions trading system to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it does it in 2 ways. Firstly, it does it through the carbon price. The carbon price incentivizes low carbon investment and operational decisions amongst the covered entities. And secondly, by climate finance. So emissions trading systems are, especially in Europe and North America, are generating substantial amount of climate finance, $300 billion so far. And this is through, as Gopal mentioned, auctioning of revenues. So it's the polluter pays principle. So the polluters are paying for their allocations, and many polluters are able to pass through those costs. So the big opportunity around climate finance is this money can be used for many beneficial purposes. So it can help industry invest in technology that's not yet commercially available, like CCUS or green hydrogen. It can support vulnerable households. It can support impacted workforces in their transition to a new economy. And also it can finance adaptation measures. In relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, clearly the climate action goal is primarily the main focus. So many jurisdictions can cover 3/4 of their national emissions through an emissions trading system. For example, South Korea, over 70%. China will be a very large percentage, India, etc. So this is helping countries deliver climate action through a cost-effective policy, and that's the primary purpose. Secondly, the industry, innovation and infrastructure. So because this policy gives industry flexibility, it encourages innovation within industry on how they can comply. And also through the revenue, it can be used to support innovation fund. For example, in the EU, there's about 40 billion euros of money available to support innovation. So companies are being given substantial amounts of money to help in their transition to a low carbon economy, like green hydrogen DRI steel making, for example, in Sweden. By 2029, there'll be full capacity low carbon steel. There's a big CCUS network in Antwerp, for example, collecting all the CO2 and storing it under the North Sea. Affordable and clean energy. So especially where the emissions trading system can interact well with the power market, it can encourage the shift away from coal towards low carbon fuels and renewables. And also the finance can be used to support innovative low carbon renewables. And then the indirect SDG impacts are how the money can be used. So the revenue can be used to support new jobs. It can be used to support the transition from people in the fossil states to a new economy, to new factories in those regions, and also health and well-being. So the idea of beneficial purposes, perhaps pioneered in California with California Climate Investments. Now Washington State have a Cap and Invest program, but many other jurisdictions are seeing the wider benefits of these policies. So the work that we're doing in India is to support a just transition through an effective carbon credit trading scheme, which looks at the design of the system. So how are the targets looking? Are they suitably ambitious? Does it protect competitiveness of exporting industry? Is it a long-term vision on the targets? Does it interact well with the power market, the wholesale and retail market? That's a vital element to ensure the power sector decarbonisation and ensure the carbon costs can be passed through to enable auctioning in the power sector. And then the finance mechanism itself, there's a lot of very interesting examples now. So Japan, for example, has a climate transition bond that provides $120 billion of money for green transformation, paid back later through auctioning in the power sector. Lots of experience in Europe and North America as well. And then also international cooperation, because not only India, but Indonesia, China, Vietnam, many other jurisdictions have got the same challenge. So just the final slide now is how this can be put into practice. So clearly there needs to be an effective design. It doesn't need to be right first time. It can be a long-term plan, perhaps over the next 10 years. How should this evolve in terms of the target setting and maybe the transition from a credit-based system to an allowance-based system? And also what sort of financial instruments can be affected? The power market in India is actually benefits from quite a good power market regulatory structure that enables these mechanisms to happen, but there will be some work to make it smooth. The revenue earmarking, how can the money be used, both at the central government level and at the state level? And what are the right ways in which money can be transferred to the relevant stakeholders based on the needs? And then lastly, the governance structure. I think we've heard already about this issue. This is a challenging one to ensure that the money is used for intended purpose, learning from the experience of the DMF fund in India and also the Clean Energy CES. But we believe this is a major opportunity. In our work, we estimate that India can generate $700 to $1,400 billion of revenue from auctioning in the carbon credit trading scheme. This is more than double the amount of money that's been generated in Europe and North America so far. So it's a huge opportunity and with massive benefits for multiple SDG goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alistair. And we would now move on to Golam Rabbani from BRAC, located in Bangladesh as well. And he will speak about his experience with locally led adaptation and especially also financing locally led adaptation. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My name is Golam Rabbani, as introduced, and I'm the head of the Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat, which was established by BRAC with support from the government of Germany through KfW. As you all know, that adaptation is not a short-term issue. It is a long-term issue. And therefore, you need to have a plan to ensure long-term financing. So to advance the adaptation efforts across the country, BRAC decided to have a national consultation and then to find the ways how to, ensure this long-term support to the adaptation action in the country. And the decision was that we will establish a trust fund, and the total amount that we received from the KfW was 11.735 million euro. And 90% of this total amount was invested in a treasury bond. And the plan was every year we get the income from the investment and use this income to support the small scale adaptation projects in 5 selected urban areas. And let me just, respond 3 questions to see how we are making the difference. I remember, when Dr. Salimul Haq was alive, he used to say, if you really want to see adaptation works, why don't you visit Bangladesh? Now, I think from BRAC, I would call, if you really want to see some difference that small finance mechanism can make, I would invite in Bangladesh and see BRAC works. So let me just respond. First question, how CBF is innovative and sustainable finance mechanism? As I explained, that we started our journey in 2020 and it is 2024. At the end of 5 years, we were able to reach 96,000 people, vulnerable people, climate migrant, displaced population in 5 selected urban areas through water supply sanitation, housing, livelihoods, drainage system, solid waste management, capacity building. So different type of hard and soft measures that we offered to this 96,000 vulnerable people. Then what is the magic? The magic is at the end of 5 years, we have, after 5 years, we exactly have the same amount of money when you started in 2019. We started with 119 crore. We have the 119 crore money in our bank. So the bonus is, 96,000 people receive those small infrastructure on wash, livelihood support, and then, drainage system, solid waste management, and all other stuff. So this is something that innovative options that BRAC established in 2019 in Bangladesh. Now let me, respond to the second question. What would happen if CVF was not there? If CVF was not there, as I was saying, sharing my experience, in one of the panels in the morning, that Bangladesh in the rural areas, many people are facing, challenges with their livelihoods because of climate change impacts. Cyclone storm surge, salinity intrusion, variation in temperature, variation in rainfall. These are affecting the fishermen, farmers, daily laborers, most of the people. At the end of the day, what they decide to move to nearest destination. So the climate migrants, the number of climate migrants is increasing according to the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, government, publications, and also from the different research. So what I see, 220,000 people could not be reached with this, small scale needs and priority needs, without having this climate bridge fund established by BRAC in Bangladesh. It was possible because we could establish this and we could work. Over 100,000 people would experience livelihood crisis in the destination. When they come here in the destination, just see the difference, when they have, housing, and when they live in the rural areas, at least they have a small home. At least they have a small home. They have a small piece of land for cultivation. They can go to the common resources for fishing. But when they arrive in the destination, they have nothing. They don't have house. They don't have access to wash. They don't have livelihoods. They don't have the other priority needs, domestic needs when they arrive in the destination. So that's the big difference that we see. So which means the 100,000 people would experience livelihood crisis if CVF was not there. And the third point is 84,000 vulnerable people would not have access to water supply and sanitation because we constructed small scale deep tube wells, reverse osmosis and submersible pump and solar powered submersible pump instead of using the diesel operation. Okay, so which means when you did the adaptation, we also ensured the mitigation as a co-benefit. All right, so this would not happen without the CVF mechanism, and thousands of women would have to wait hours and hours to fetch water for drinking. Right, they have to go out, to collect the water. In some cases, we ask the question, how long you walk to collect water? They said in some cases 1 to 2 kilometers. Now in many cases, they are not doing it. I can give you example, Greenland Abasan, which is one of the largest slum areas, low income communities in Bangladesh, in southern one of the southern city, which is Khulna. So that's what the changes that we are making. And incidences of waterborne diseases would not only reduce their productivity, but also increase their cost of treatment every month. That's the response that we get from the monitoring and evaluation report, from our secretariat. And let me just, respond my third and last question. What are the learnings? Let me share some of them. We have a lot of learnings. What are the, key learnings that we have? It is proven that LLA approach, locally led adaptation approach, perfectly work, through our mechanism. You need to consult with the target communities. If you do not consult with the target communities with the priority problems and the needs, you have to change the activities and work plans in the second year or third year. In our case, we are not. So I'm just finishing it. And my second and last one is, it was always better if you build the capacity of the project staff at the beginning, to integrate the climate projection and how to manage and, an adaptation project, not the development project. There is a difference between development and adaptation project. Thank you so much, ma'am. I stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Rabbani. So now we took a turn. We started with the Agenda 2030, with the overarching agenda that brings the different developmental challenges together, which is not delivering to the degree that we were hoping. We then focused on one transformational field, which is the field of water governance. Moved then to transformational lever. The transformational lever here was carbon credit trading scheme, and then moved on to the level of reflecting on which governance levels are involved, which always is, of course, a multi-level exercise. I spoke about international water governance, and we then moved to the local level. It always requires the several levels involved. From there, we now move to our honorable advisor, to the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, and the Ministry of Water Resources of the government of Bangladesh. Please give us your high-level statement. Thank you.
First, thank you for inviting me here. I think governance is actually a very complex term. I thought governance is complex in only our part of the world, but entering the climate negotiation, I learned that governance is even more complex in the global arena. And people who speak English seem to understand English less when it comes to the climate justice demands of countries like ours. My colleague has drafted a very nice speech for me, but I think it's better that I speak from the heart. I think we have to deal with adaptation and mitigation. But I think we have to fix the global economic system first. I'm not sure how, in a world with crony capitalism and ultra capitalism, you will manage to put nature at the center and not mega projects and financial priorities. That is where I think changes are needed. So when we talk about governance, if we don't really fix our development goals and make the same compatible with nature, I don't think any model of development will work. Fixing the priorities right is what needs to happen. Now, when I'm talking to you, in this year alone, Bangladesh has experienced 4 floods, of which 2 were of unprecedented scales. People were saying that, I mean, there are generations, and people were saying that they have never seen this scale of flood in their part of the country. So all the flood control infrastructure that we had in place collapsed. The rescue operators who were sent to the flood affected area most of them were from Bangladesh Army. So when they moved to the site, we lost contact with them because they were also not equipped. They knew that they were alive, but there was no way for us to know that they were alive. And for about 5 long days, the water was increasing in meters every hour. The entire area was underwater. We did not even know how to operate the, the rescue initiatives. And 2 floods have impacted 1.7% of the Bangladesh budget. And when I'm talking here today, 1.2 million people of coastal Bangladesh is waterlogged due to erratic rainfall and also change in river morphology due to climatic reason. And the very harsh reality that even if all the NDCs are implemented, we are still on a pathway of a temperature increase of 2.8 degree is really alarming. I mean, will only governance fix it? Will only formation of new committees or new ways of formatting committees fix it? Or we actually need a major change in setting the priorities. I think we have done a good job in setting the SDGs, but we are not performing equally in prioritizing the climatic challenge so as climate inaction does not become obstacles in realizing the SDGs. We are missing the point there completely. Now, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries due to climate change, but we have contributed very less to the problem. And when we are faced with climatic challenges, that impacts our ability to attain the Sustainable Development Goal. We are already constrained with our ability. With increased climatic challenges, that ability goes further down. And these climatic challenges increase our ongoing actions to reduce poverty, to ensure food security, to have the right infrastructure in place to protect people from natural disasters. So in other words, the climatic threats and the realities are putting millions and millions of people in my part of the world under survival threat, and their lives and livelihoods are really in danger. Now, talking about a proper, transparent governance, we are often given assistance to prepare plans. So we have our NDCs, we have our national adaptation plans, and then we are told that go for sector-wise national adaptation plan. So we keep on preparing policies and strategies and plans and programs. But when it comes to implementing the programs, we are told that your governance level is not high enough for us to invest. You have to be really more transparent. Now look at this. When you have committed to give us new and additional fund, when the promise was there to disburse the fund against the principle of CBDR and the principle of polluter pays, and you're not doing it, and you're questioning our governance system, that becomes a major dilemma. Studies have shown that since 2009 from 2009 up to 2022, in these 14 years, Bangladesh have taken many climate projects, out of which we had to take 12.78 billion USD in climate debt, and we got only about 268 million grants for dealing with adaptation and mitigation. So every citizen of Bangladesh now has a per capita climate debt of $80 Now, when we come to talk about the adaptation fund gap, the gap is 5.5 billion USD only for Bangladesh. The adaptation fund gap report estimates that the South Asian region needs 98 billion USD per year for effective adaptation efforts. And on a global scale, the total adaptation finance gap is 366 billion USD per year. So with a 366 billion USD gap per year, it is actually very difficult for countries like ours to sustain our efforts for, delivering against the sustainable development goals. Now, while we have been asking for grant-based finance, when we have been asking for finance that will be sufficient, that will be accessible, and that will be adequately structured, my department and ministry people always tell us that they really don't have the capacity to draft the project the way the global financial mechanism want them. So that scrutinization process is very, very difficult. So the adaptation fund that we talk about is about how much we get. Although there are claims that 100% has been paid, there are counterclaims that are evidence-based that show that only 1/4 have been paid. So if it's about how, there is no satisfactory answer. If it is about how much, the answer is not satisfactory. If it is about how these resources are governed and implemented, that is where I think most of us are very frustrated. We are just left with 5 years to accelerate our progress towards sustainable development goal. And this timeline is not a luxury, it's a ticking clock. We must urgently invest to ensure that our policies, plans, and strategies are translated into actions. The strategies we discuss in these rooms must be transformed into tangible, impactful projects and actions on the ground, both in vulnerable countries and in vulnerable communities. And the climate crisis demands nothing less than our immediate commitment to act. And having, involved in the whole process, I would also urge that the South Asian countries and countries like us, the LDC countries, also prepare their national budget through a climate lens. Waiting for the rich countries to deliver against their commitment is taking too long. It's very, very important that we design our natural budgets through a climate lens. We focus not only on infrastructure and mega projects, but also on responding to the needs of those most affected. The process must be fast, adaptive, and inclusive. And we can't wait for the global negotiation process to conclude, make the arrangement accessible and transparent, while our people on the ground are dying, are struggling for their livelihood. I think our national governments also have to be transparent, inclusive, and must move on their own to ensure that economic priorities do not overtake the climatic priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We now have 15 minutes for open discussion and, of course, discussion on the whole panel, but especially I would invite, I don't know, can you still stay? Or? Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yes, then we do a quick photo session, please. So thank you so much for this session. And I see one hand up. Maybe we can have a microphone into the middle. We would collect. So please, if you want to come in with comments, remarks, questions, please prepare yourself. And yeah.
Yeah, hi, Ines Dombrowski from the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. Yeah, quite an intriguing panel and quite some circles that you fulfilled here. So I'm particularly intrigued by two things. One is Shailly, you mentioned a certain north-south divide in the HLPF between interconnectedness and balancing the three pillars of sustainability, if I got you right. And how do you reflect? I mean, I would appreciate if you would elaborate a bit and maybe also put it in connection to what the Honorable Advisor said in terms of even questioning the capitalistic system, yeah? One small comment on the side of maybe self advertisement. I'm not sure, are you maybe aware of the NDC SDG connections tool that we at IDOS and together with SEI and others have developed that is actually already mapping NDC contributions to the SDGs, and it is an ongoing effort. There will be another update soon. And then I'm wondering, I mean, there's this water theme and all the water crises in the panel. Can we, and the idea of really societal negotiations based on these changes, how the water cycle affects us. Yeah, can we think of water, I mean, water changes driven by climate change as a impetus for societal rethinking? What are your thoughts about this? Thanks a lot.
Just look around whether there are others in the room who would like to come in. There will be another opportunity, of course, but maybe anyone wants to come in as well. Otherwise, we hand it back to the panel. I would hand it back to you, Shailly, first, and also invite the colleagues to reflect on the water-related question. But Shailly, please.
So yes, on the question of the North-South divide, it is explained a little more in the policy brief. There are some copies here. But, there are like two ways of approaching this. We talk a lot about integrated approaches or sometimes even co-benefits. In terms of when we analyze the discussions and the statements at the HLPF, and even like interacting with policymakers, often it is seen that there are no direct or short-term or immediate synergies at times between the climate and sustainable development agenda. And hence, and at times what happens is that from the perspective, this is not my perspective, but from the perspectives of the discussion, it is seen that the developing countries feel that climate often, gets prioritized even over the poverty eradication agenda. And so that's why they emphasize on balancing of social, economic, and the environmental goals. Wherein in case of the developed countries, they do see synergies and taking the climate action head on. But also what one sees is that it doesn't sufficiently always take into account adaptation actions. So there is a disconnect as to what is, if we see what is prioritized at the global level, usually the temperature goals, which usually lead to mitigation and not so much adaptation. That is evident in terms of the finance flows. And that is why to push that narrative and counter that narrative, there is this aspect of looking at balance. But yes, of course, the capitalism question is kind of complex. However, it is that money speaks and money power speaks. And so ultimately, capitalism does get prioritized, even though it is not so much favored by many of the environmentalists sitting in this room attending this conference. So that is there. About the SDG NDC connected tools, yes, we have referred to a couple of tools. One was developed by TERI under a framework agreement, which mapped the SDGs of various NDCs. This was, of course, NDC 1.0. Now we are heading to NDC 3.0, and we basically would like to call for larger factoring in on SDGs as countries revise their NDCs and vice versa. It's not just looking at the NDCs. So yeah, I just like this.
Now, maybe I don't see hands on the question of can the dealing with the water crisis be a catalyzer for dealing with climate change as well? That's how I understood you. This is what the WBGU argues, yeah, and it argues this by on the one side reflecting on the situation that we have a warming planet, but also a geopolitically warming or more tense planet, and we see the destabilizing of societies unfold across actually quite a number of continents and in all income groups of countries, high, middle, and low income groups of countries. I'm now just immediately also thinking of the voting behavior on the European Union level this year, also in the United States, and that reminds us of the past, where water again and again has also been, and transboundary water management has been also a way to come again and again together to overcome conflictual situations by focusing on the joint discussions around water. Thus we see here and argue that narrowing down on topics such as water that is crucial for life, but it's also very tangible. It is a highly political topic, but it can be often also discussed in a rather apolitical manner, and that, of course, is a strength. Yeah, it can be discussed out of a management lens, so to say, in a rather boiling it down to the technical level of managing the water, and there creates a situation where different stakeholder groups are given the chance to sort of cross their tensions. This is why we say, while it is one of the catalyzers, I found the statement by the minister. She just reminded us and said 1.2 million people are waterlogged due to erratic rainfall. Just to also keep in mind, I mean, we reflected on extreme weather events out of droughts, the droughts and floods perspective, as well as with regard to water quality. But of course, the logging, of course, is another component. And I see one more hand up, but also invite the rest of the panel to come in a minute. Please, can we get a microphone?
Thank you very much. I have a small concern regarding in Bangladesh. My name is Haruna Rashid. I work for Lighthouse, and it is working in Bangladesh. Thanks to our advisor and all the panelists, they share excellent information and the knowledge shared already. My concern is regarding in Bangladesh, we working in the area that's called Barin Track. That they have it's about 6 districts, so many people, no water. Because the water level ground down is about 600 to more than that. So even some people die in the name of the district called Nauga, due to water. They revolted themselves and they died. So that's a huge case. Actually, I need to have an attention from the UN agencies, the international communities, not because of only the Farakka, the bilateral issue, not because of. It's also an issue for our case due to the climates. So we need to have a additional attention for these issues. Barintak is a really huge issue for this, and we cannot address this from our own resources and our own technology and our knowledge. Thank you very much. I think you will have attention for this.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to come in and engage?
From Bangladesh, but I consider it as a as a question and comment mixed. But anyway, as you have heard from our advisor that she really emphasized about the converting policy into action. We talked about long time. We talked about this NAP, NDCs, and I remember that we prepared NAPA and submitted in 2005. and only 15 projects were submitted. And it was very unfortunate in 10 years of period, 10 years of time, only 5 projects were supported. So 10 projects were this, and those activities were immediate and urgent action. And then we prepared our Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, then NAB, then NDC. So all policy instruments are there. Now it is appropriate time to convert this into action. So that's what he mentioned. And I believe, just to respond to you, I think since our honorable advisor is not here, but for your information, government of Bangladesh is already allocating 2.9 to 3 billion US dollar to implement these adaptation actions. But at the same time, it is also true that we need $8.5 billion per year. That means there is a big gap. So this gap has to be really addressed to ensure effective adaptation in the country. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Now I don't see, I see one more hand. Yeah, please, microphone.
Yeah, I have one more question. I'm Jan Siegmeier from the German Advisory Council on Global Change. Maybe to you, Mr. Rabbani, maybe because you have can share some insights. When there's so much talk at this COP about the effort that you have to make to get funding and the huge delays, could you just point out 1 or 2 main things that hold you up? What is it exactly? What is the technical issue? Is it a technical issue? Is it data concerns? Is it general policy frameworks that need to be in place? Could you just name 1 or 2 priority areas that you see in project applications in Bangladesh that are responsible for these huge delays that were mentioned?
This is another tragedy. I remember, when we prepared the NAPA, National Adaptation Programs of Action, and we followed the UNFCCC guided methodology. And this, in most of the cases, when we prepared this, this national instrument to address climate change or environmental, assessment, we followed the given methodology. But again, at the end of that document preparation, once we ask for the resources or we start to implement this this project, then the other issue comes in. Well, you did not follow this. Your financial mechanism is not correct, and this methodology was not right. So these things happen, every time. So some development partners acknowledge that and they support. And some development partners, talk about, well, there are some still gap. So, so those are there. And the second point is, it is true that, when I talk about the climate projections, once you need to address the very local level projects, the area that he was mentioning, Chuadanga is one of our, 64 district, but this district and the people of this district are highly exposed to the highest level of temperature, 42 degrees centigrade temperature. So if you have this kind of experiences, you might have to design a different type of project, based on the local context. Okay. So these are the necessary, these are the, the important area. Now the question is, how do you really, project what may happen in 2030? What may happen in 2040? Now we are facing 42 degrees centigrade. Are we expecting this 42 degrees centigrade to be increased to 50 degrees centigrade? Then what kind of projects and what type of a mechanism that you need to place there? Whether the people will be able to live there. So this kind of challenges that we are facing. So one is appropriate modeling, updated modeling, concrete modeling, and then prepare the instrument, update the instruments. But we cannot sit idle. All right. I think I stop here.
Thank you. So we've heard the minister, honorable advisor, underline. She says, well, it's about priority setting, and it is about actually moving from talk to action. She said this in a much more polite manner, but exactly. So before that, and of course, moving from talk to action means to focus on particular fields of action. The Agenda 2030 outlines those. We have the discussion on transformational fields. Here we today looked at water, and we have the discussion on transformational levers. And I just want to bring Alistair once more back into the conversation, seeing that carbon trading and CO2 pricing is, of course, here also at this particular COP discussed as a crucial lever for and accelerator. And I would invite you to reflect on this, and then we take it to all other panelists to just once more reflect on where do you see the main accelerators, also in your own work, where do you want to put your energy to emphasize? But Alistair, please come in first.
Yeah, thank you very much. And in terms of the accelerator for SDGs and climate interaction, as I mentioned, I think there's a natural interaction between emissions trading systems and SDGs. So the primary purpose is the climate action. So I think in terms of the accelerator, the emissions trading system can work. I mentioned 3 SDGs where there's a direct impact, not only the climate action, but also the industrial innovation component and the clean and affordable energy component. So both the carbon pricing, the primary driver of the ETS, but also the climate finance secondary method, the secondary means of the ETS, both impact on all of these 3. And then the indirect impacts are through the work and economic growth, the reduced inequality, and the health and well-being. And I think that increasingly jurisdictions see that acceptance of climate policy is also conditional on the stakeholder buy-in to the benefits of these policies. And jurisdictions are increasingly seeing the wider opportunities and benefits that the revenue that's generated can be used for. So I think that in terms of making this work in practice and making the accelerator real, not just theoretical, particularly when we're looking at SDGs and the multiple beneficiaries, I think it does require high-level political buy-in at the top level, so the Prime Minister's office or the level of government that can oversee the individual ministries. And then proper, like in the case of India, so MOE, FCC, Just Transition Task Force, and getting proper support through those levers. But yeah, I think that there's definitely massive opportunity. The amount of money that was talked about earlier, ETS could generate substantial revenue. And one of the beauties is the learning from the examples of other jurisdictions where money can be generated even before a system is fully optimized, like in Japan. So they're already making available $120 billion of money to give to Japanese companies for their transformation. But the money's going to be raised up to 2033 through ETS. So I think that there's a lot of experience now globally, and I think this is an exciting opportunity. Primarily, this is going to help the country achieve its NDC targets in a cost-effective way. But these other benefits, particularly in a country like India with a very large fossil fuel economy and whole economy reliant on coal, requires a lot of support. So I think this is a great opportunity that we hope will be enacted in practice.
Thank you, Alistair. And we would now sort of invite the other panelists for their final statements. We start with Gopal and then end with Shailly. Thanks.
Thank you. Quickly, just to reflect on what Alistair said, I think I'll stick to the point that I made earlier is all about when you talk about integrating carbon revenue or carbon market sustainable development, I think is basically trying to bring in an integration of the top-down and bottom-up approach, because each project is very unique, and particularly these contexts that we actually belong to are very, very complex. So let's, for example, you talk of, and when you actually the markets get saturated, because one of the major problems of the CDM project actually is that all the low-hanging fruits got exhausted, right? So basically that all EG projects actually got over. Now we are actually getting into difficult projects, and when we bring in the sustainable development dimension into it, so it actually adds another layer. On the top of that, these are being questioned because there is a lot of integrity questions coming up, particularly when you talk of carbon markets. Okay, the voluntary carbon market is operating under the larger darkness of integration, I mean, the integrity problem. So that problem is again something which actually very, very critical. So I think from the compliance point of view, also when you try to look at the carbon market from sustainable development point of view, each project actually requires some kind of scrutiny, whether this is only a money-making project or it's really contributing to local development. That question requires further exploration, more research in this area, and more in-depth introspection. Okay, so that's the point that I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please.
Thank you so much. Well, I mean, if you talk about the strengthening the governance, why do you do that? Why do you need that? It is needed because we want to ensure effectiveness of adaptation. And how do you do it? I have 2 points. The first one is, at the national system, in most of the countries, if I'm not wrong, national system understands the climate change adaptation, mitigation, greenhouse gas emission. But what happens to the local government system? Local government entities will actually implement the adaptation action. So you need to build capacity of those institutions so that they can effectively, implement, they understand the adaptation, and they can achieve the adaptation. Second point is transparency and accountability. Everywhere, it is needed to be ensured in adaptation governance. And third and last point is easy access to finance. You need to have a simplified, easy, and smart access to climate finance. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Ali, please.
In terms of the accelerator, definitely, since my intervention focused on multilateralism, we have to see multilateralism as an accelerator itself. What kind of signal it gives? Is it promoting processes that are running into parallels, which is happening in case of the SDG process and the climate process? So somewhere, how do we kind of bring these together, even if there are soft linkages? Of course, you cannot compare the hard linkages because NDC has its own legal, the climate agreement, Paris Agreement, and UNFCCC has its own legal international regime, whereas SDG is a little bit more on the softer side of the regime. We also see the accelerators as NDC 3.0 itself as an accelerator. But again, hopefully, NDC 3.0 in most cases should improvise on the previous 2 experience in terms of much stronger vertical coordination that is across ministries and departments, as well as horizontal across ministries and departments, as well as vertical going right up to the local level, as was highlighted in the case of adaptation. And then, of course, as the minister said, that there is only so much posturing you can do in international sphere. You have to get on with the national and subnational and local actions in any case. And so integrating it in processes such as budgets through public procurement, this is an area, of course, which we've been very active, is very, very key. So.
Thank you so much, Shailly. With this, we come to a close. We had a look into the synergies between climate and the Agenda 2030, partly through the water lens, partly through the CO2 trading scheme lens or emissions trading scheme lens, as well as always again and again from different levels of governance, the multilateral level, the national level, and the local level. I hope that this was an inspiring discussion, many inspiring points, especially also in the high-level statement by the Honorable Advisor. And with this, I am left to thank all of you, thank the panelists, and especially I would like to thank the organizing institutions, and allow me to briefly read out the names of these institutions once more. I want to thank the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, here represented. I want to thank TERI School of Advanced Studies, also represented with Gopal. The German Advisory Council on Global Change, also in the room, and myself. The Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association, BELA. And the Asia Society Policy Institute, ASPI, represented by Alistair. Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks.